Hello and welcome to something slightly different from Haberdashers Adam's Astronomy. This week we are going to be looking at painting the 8 planets of the solar system to scale. Now, rationale for this was based on a response I had from quite a few students from the Earth and Moon video, where I looked at those to scale with one another. And they said, okay, well, if that gives us an idea how big the Earth and the Moon are, how big's the rest of the solar system? Now, I wasn't going to source all the models for making all the other planets, not just yet at least. So I decided instead to see if I could paint the planets to scale with each other. As you can see from the footage we've got playing right now, I started off with a nice layer of black acrylic paint just to give the canvas something to work on. I then left that to dry before marking the midpoint on either side. This allowed me to draw a line between these two midpoints so that I had a center point from where I could have my planets coming out of. So rather than drawing them as 8 separate planets, what I decided to do was have one starting point on the far side of the canvas, so that would be the center for all planets. And then from here, I measured out the different radii. So for the larger planets, I used a piece of string with markings on it at the correct distances, then did my best to essentially form a dot-to-dot of where each planet would go. So you can see Neptune and Uranus being drawn out here. Once these were all done, I was able to move on to the planets of the inner solar system, so Earth, Venus, Mars, and Mercury, and found various things around the lab that happened to just be the right diameter for what we needed for each of these objects, whether that was duct tape, aerosol cans, the lid for some acrylic paint, or the lid of a Pritt stick, which works perfectly for our Mercury. This then gave me a nice clear drawing and guides for where each planet would go. But from that, it was time to put paint on the palette and actually get started. The first planet that I chose to paint was Jupiter. The reasons for this were twofold. One, I wanted to start with a planet that had an interesting atmosphere. And for Jupiter, obviously, with its famous storms, that was something that appealed to me. 2 was just a logistical one. It was easier to paint from a larger, working towards smallest. So it made for a sensible starting point. For this, I was mainly using a mix of the Naples yellow, titanium white, some buff titanium, and a little bit of yellow ochre, though for the stormier clouds started bringing in some burnt umber as well. Obviously, for our scale, Jupiter is the largest of the planets. In real life, it's got a radius of 69,911 kilometers. That wouldn't quite fit if I did it at a 1-to-1 scale. So for our painting, we've got it as 40 centimeters radius. Next up, I chose to paint Saturn. This allowed me to work with a nice large brush, as there's significantly less storms on Saturn than there are on Jupiter. This seems to be in part due to the further distance from the Sun that Saturn has and the cooler core temp. This leads to less variation in temperature within the layers of Saturn, and as a result less storms. For this it was generally a lot paler colours, so an awful lot of the Naples yellow and titanium white being used, lots of buff titanium coming into the mix here. Working with the broad brush was nice and relaxing, especially after the more intricate work of doing these storms on Jupiter. As the second largest planet in the solar system, Saturn has a radius of around 58,000 kilometres. For our scale, that's just 33 centimetres to have it in proportion to Jupiter. As you can tell from the footage, I've made the artistic decision not to paint in the rings. If I did so, these would extend beyond the radius of Jupiter and might be a bit tricky to sort of overlay onto the other planets. Now, if you thought I was going to just work my way along the painting, so did I, although I got a little bit sloppy with the edge of Saturn and decided to stick with the sort of beige colour scheme and do Venus for the next planet. This allowed me to neaten up the edge around Saturn and have some white spirit dry so that it wouldn't make Uranus too blurry, and allowed me to do a bit more intricate painting for the next section. Venus is only narrowly smaller than the Earth at 6,052 kilometres radius. This on our scale works out as 3.46 centimetres. And what we're seeing here is not much of the actual surface of the planet, because a lot of Venus is obscured by the incredibly dense cloud cover. This gives it a yellowish white look, which we can see. I'm just adding in the intricate details on the cloud now. At this point, it was time to tackle Uranus, and unfortunately we're not going to have much time for backing music on this one because it was an incredibly quick planet to paint. Its actual radius is just over 25,000 kilometres. On our scale, that's 14.5 centimetres. It has methane in its atmosphere, which gives it the sort of light blue colour, and is the most heavily tilted of the planets, with an angle of 98 degrees between where its axis is and the plane in which it orbits. And it took that little time that we're now on to Neptune, where in reality it has a radius of 24,600 kilometres. So for our scale, that's around 14.08 centimetres. It is a darker blue than Uranus. It also has methane, but we're not quite sure why it appears that slightly darker hue. And in fact, more recent photos from NASA have revealed that the dark blue that people think of when they see Neptune is a slightly false colour from high contrast photos that the Voyager missions took. It's got some of the strongest storms in the solar system. After this, it was time for Mars, and adding a couple more colours to my palette. This proved to be a delicate phase of the painting because the paint was still wet from having done the other planets, so some slightly awkward painting going on at this stage. Now, Mars obviously is famously known as the red planet. This is due to the iron oxide, otherwise known as rust, that's in its soil. It's also the planet that we've sent most landers and rovers to. We've got a couple currently roaming around on its surface. Unfortunately, they didn't quite fit into the image due to being a bit too small for our scale. At this point it was time for Mercury, mostly a mix of titanium white and ivory black, although with some burnt umber mixed in, along with some slightly lighter shades just to give the brownish hue that comes to the grey on this planet. Obviously, Mercury is the smallest of the planets, with a radius of just 2,400 kilometres. To our scale, that's just 1.4 centimetres. It's also an extremely heavily cratered planet, so the majority of my time for this one was spent painting the craters. And finally, I got to do the little sliver of paint for the Earth. Its radius in kilometres is just 6,371, so only narrowly larger than Venus. This, for our scale, meant that it had a radius of 3.64 centimetres. Vast majority of this was pure ultramarine blue, and then using titanium white to give a little speckling of where the clouds would be covering on different parts of the planet. This definitely was the most relaxing process of any of the videos I filmed thus far, so if you have enjoyed what we've painted here, then please do consider giving us a like and a subscribe, and potentially we might do a bit more painting mixed with science. And there we go, we've got the finished product here, all 8 planets painted to scale. It was a nice busy day for me, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed the process of getting a bit hands-on again and expressing my artistic side. So hopefully you enjoyed it too, and for more videos from us, please do continue to watch this space. Thank you very much.